Now we are going to see how the communication happens between two different aura components, or how can we pass parameter from one component to other. So let's quickly begin. The first thing that we are going to see in this is value binding or data binding. That is, if there are two aura component, one is parent, one is child, and I'm calling the child component from the parent, I should be able to pass an attribute from one component to another. So let's see how can we do that. For that, I've created two components. One is the value binding parent and one is value binding child. In both of them, I've implemented lightning quick action so that we can call it from the quick action. Let me create an attribute in this parent component called as parent attribute. It will be a string. And now, when do we call two components are in a parent-child relationship is, let's say this is the container component. And from the container component, whichever component I'm calling, or the contained component that I have in the container component, that would be child, and the containing component or the container one would be the parent. So here I'm going to call value binding child. And let me save. Let's also display a message. We don't need this button for now. So in parent component, all that I've done is I've just added a statement called this is a parent component value, and I'm displaying the value of the parent attribute, which is a string type, and its default value is ABC. So ABC should be displayed over here. Now let us go to our child component. In the child component as well, we are going to create an attribute, string attribute. Its name would be child attribute, just for our reference. And the value you see is, this is a child component value, and we are displaying whatever value is over here. Now this component I am going to call from my parent, which is, the syntax is this way. So in angular brackets, I write C colon and then the child component name. And in that, this attribute is exactly same as what we have over here. So the spelling and everything, the case sensitivity, everything should be same. In that, I'm passing this particular attribute that I have. So right now we have ABC. So ABC is going to get passed over here. And so when we come here, the child component value should be displayed as ABC. That's how simple it is. Now let me go to account, generic button. I'll call the parent, because as it is, we are calling the child from the parent. Let us refresh. So the moment I click on generic button, you see, this is parent component value ABC, and this is child component value also came to ABC. Now, I think it's not refreshed. That is why it is showing us the button. anyhow, let's refresh it a couple of times. So when you click on inspect and you right click on this, I'm not able to right click, but usually when you right click, you get empty cache and hard reload option. So it vacates the cache memory and reloads the component. Okay, so now you see the parent default value was ABC, and because there is a value binding, the ABC got passed to the child component, and that is why the child component child attribute value is also ABC. Now there is not only this much in value binding. Let me create a button on child component. And let me create a button on parent component. The name of the button on the parent component is change parent value, and that on the child is change child value. Now both of them have handle click. Let us create this method. I'm just going to write one line of code here in the handle click. Parent attribute that I have in the parent component, instead of ABC, I'm going to reset it to parent whenever someone clicks on this button from the parent component. Coming to the child component, whenever someone clicks on this change child value button, I'm going to handle click, and on the handle click method, I'm going to set the child attribute to value child. That is it that I'm doing. Okay, now initially when everything got loaded, parent component's default value was ABC. So now what will happen? So that ABC got passed into child attribute. But now because this is a value binding or data binding, whenever I click on this button, my component is going to set the value in parent attribute to parent. So that parent, the changed value is also going to reflect in the child attribute because there is a value binding. So whenever the parent attribute value that we are changing to parent word, what happens is because it is value bound with the child attribute, this new value will go into the child attribute. So let's say I click on change parent value. You see, parent got reflected in the parent component also and in the child component also. Similarly, when I change the value in child attribute on handle click into child, because there is a value binding, that child attribute's value will come back to parent attribute and reflect in the parent component as well. So let's say I click on change child value. You see, child is over here also, and it got backward and it gave the same value to its parent attribute also. So this is about value binding. Now, unbound expression could also be made. Now, what is unbound? So this, when you write with exclamation B dot, the attribute name, it is called value bound. But if I write hash V dot, it is unbound expression. What do we mean by that is the first time when the parent is calling the child, it is going to pass on the value. But next time when we click on the button and change the value in the parent, it is not going to go and propagate into the child. Similarly, when I click on the button and change the child attributes value, it is not going to pass that value to parent attribute because it is unbound. So I've made it unbound. Let me refresh. You see, even when it is unbound, whatever value default was there in parent got passed to child. But now when I do change parent, you see, parent got changed over here, but it did not propagate to the child. Similarly, when I change the child value, it just reflects on the child. It does not go back to the parent. So this is unbound expression. Now, the next thing that we are going to learn is event. There are two types of events, component events and application events. Now, component events are used when there is a parent-child relationship between two components. And we can send some, like we can fire the event from child component and parent component can handle it when it comes to component event. But in application events, even when there is no parent-child relationship between two components, and still they want to communicate with each other, in that case, we use application event. Now, let me take you back to the value binding that we did previously, right? Now, in value binding, what were we doing is we were calling the child component, like you can see over here from parent, I'm calling the child component. And I was passing the parent attribute into the child attribute, right? But as opposed to that, in component event example that I'm going to show you, I'm just going to call the component, not the attribute within it. So this is a parent component that I have, and this is the child component. So let me quickly create an attribute in the parent component. Okay. Now let me display it. Let me display this message. I have created a or attribute called message. And by default, the value in it is no message. And I'm just displaying that attribute called b.message. Message from child component. We have not yet received anything. So I'll say no message. And the last thing is I'm going to call the child component. Here you see I have not passed any attribute. Oh, in the value binding, I was passing attribute from parent to child, but here I am not passing any attribute from parent to child. Now coming to the child component. Now, what are we doing in the child component is just mentioning that it is a child component. So I've just typed child component so that we can recognize that this section is of child component. And I'm creating a lightning button, send message to parent. The moment you click on this button, we are going to fire the component event. Now, what is a component event and how do we fire it? So like I said, there is a parent-child relationship between the parent component and child component. Component event can only be fired from child component and can only be handled by the parent. So it flows from child to parent. It cannot flow from parent to child. So that is why I am going to fire component event from child and it is going to be handled by parent. But now, in order to fire the component event, we first need to make a lightning component event. Now, events, like I told you, are of two types. Both of them you can go and create like this. You can go here, put the name of the event, and that is it. Sorry, this was not the event. Here it is. You just mentioned the name of the event. So I've already created a component event. Let me open that for you. So this is our component event. Now, what is the syntax for it is type becomes component here because it's not application. Description is optional. And then within the event, I have an attribute called message, and it is of type string. Now, sorry, whenever we are going to click on this button, it is going to fire this particular component event. And yeah, so for now, just remember that it is going to fire this event. Okay. Now, in order to be able to fire this event, we need to register that event in the component which is going to fire that event. So the syntax to register the event is register a component event, to be precise, is this, or a register event name equal to whatever name that you want to give and type equal to the name of that particular event. So we have given the name as CMP event. That is why C:CMP event. Now, because I've registered this event, I'll be able to fire this component event. Now, in my fire component event method, what am I going to do is first of all, I am going to get component dot get event. This is the syntax for getting the event. Now, C event, what is this? It is the name of the event. This was the name of the event that you have created, and this is the name that you have given for that particular event in this component to refer. So this name that you have given, you need to use it over here, C event, and dot set param. Now, when we are calling this event, right, it means we are calling this event. There is an attribute in it which is named as message. So what I'm doing is I'm setting the parameter of that particular component event to something. So I need to give the exact name, which whatever name I've used over here, I need to give that exact name. And because it is a string, I'm passing a string to it. So the message is good evening, and it is from a child to the parent. So I've just saved it. So whenever I'll click on this button, it is going to fire this component event. Now, when I fire that component event, it should actually go and send this message to the parent component, right? So parent is the handler. So we need to specify that this parent is going to handle any event thrown from this child component. Or in other words, I could say this parent component is going to handle this event when it gets fired. So in order to handle that, we need to specify that this parent component is going to handle it. And how do we do that is by specifying a handler. So how do you declare a handler is or a handler name equal to, again, name whatever you have given over here to refer. That name would be given in the name. Event would be the actual name of the event. And action would be which method in this lightning component should be called when this event gets fired. So when this event will get fired, it will go and notify this, and then the handler of this will call this particular method. So now I need to make that method. So I'm making that method here. Now, whichever event got fired, I'm going to say event.getParam and name of that particular parameter, which is message in our case. So getting that in a variable and setting the value comp.set v.message. Now here also we had an attribute called message, which I'm displaying over here. So I'm setting that value into the value which I got from this particular event. So let me save this. And let's edit the generic button to have the parent component. Okay. Let me click on the generic button now. So right now you see message from child component. This statement was on the parent component, and this statement and this button is on the child component. Now when I click send message to parent, you see in the parent component, the message attribute got updated. So what happened in a nutshell is from the child component, we clicked on this button. This button fired the CMP event. And when we fired the CMP event, we had passed this particular message from the child component to CMP event. And CMP event when fired, this parent component got notified because it had a handler for that event. And that is why uh, it came to the parent component, and in parent component, whenever that event comes, we are calling one method in which we are setting the v.message attribute into this message that we got from the event. That is what happened. And this is how the component event works. Now moving to the next topic, which is application event. So for that, let's take an example. I have created an application, and how do you do that is new lightning application. You write the name here and just submit. That's how I created a application. Now in that application, I have created two components, component 1 and component 2. Now this is not called as parent-child component because both of them are declared in an application. So they are not parent and child. Now, when I want to communicate between component 1 and component 2, how do I do that? Because there is no parent-child relationship. So we can't use a component event. So this is the case where we are going to use the application event. So let me go to component 1. In component 1, all that I'm going to do is just have a lightning button and a message saying that it is component 1. So it displays component 1 and I have a lightning button. On clicking component 1 button, I'm going to fire the application event. Now I have created an app event. How do you create an app event? Same way, new lightning event and then name the event. So name of the event is app event. The difference here is that the type would be application instead of component. And inside the application, I have an aura attribute of type string called message. Now, just like we had registered event and handled event in our component event, same way, we need to register the application event in the firing component and handle the event in the handling component. So because I'm going to fire my application event from component 1, that's the reason I got to register my event from component 1. Now the syntax for registering a application event is slightly different than how you do for a component event. The name would be whatever name that you want to give, and the type would be C:\app event. So here the declaration is the same, but when you handle the event, it is a little different. I'll show you when we go there. So we have registered this. Now let us declare or define this method where we are actually going to fire the app event. Let's go to the controller and create this method, fire application event. In this method, what I'm doing is variable, any name I can give $a.get C:\app event. Now this is the actual name of the app event that we have. And in that app event, we have a parameter or attribute called as message. So here I'm going to set parameters for that message and give it some value. So I'm saying good evening, message from component 1. And then all I'm going to do is fire this application event. Now, because I want my component 2 to handle this event, there are a few things that I'm going to do in component 2. First of all, just display the message. In order to display the message, we first need to create the message attribute. So let's create a message attribute. And next thing is we need to handle the application event. So here is the handler. Now here event would be the actual event that you used, and we don't need to mention the name or type or anything. It would just be action equal to and whatever method that we want to fire when we have captured this event which got fired. So let us declare or define this method actually in the controller. Event.getParam, we are getting the message attribute and storing it in the message attribute that we have in our component 2. And that message attribute we are displaying over here. So that's how easy it is. This is how you handle and fire an application event. So let me give here component 1 and let us save it. Many a times Aura component do not reflect the changes. So if they don't panic. You need to refresh it a couple of times, or else just right click, open this inspect window. And then when you right click on this, you will get empty cache and hard reload. So that would be sufficient. So now clicking on the generic button, it shows us component 1 because I have not displayed anything in component 2. Oh, there is something wrong. Let me find out what I have displayed. I'm sorry. Component 2, I have displayed it. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I don't know what am I doing. Okay, I'm so sorry. So when you want to test this, because we are using an application, there is an option for you to preview that. So I'll just click on the preview button. And now I can see both the components. And there, why I was not able to see is because I added component 1, right? So it is just going to show me component 1, right? Because I have not called component 2 from component 1. I've called both the components from app. So that was the mistake. So when we preview the app for components, you don't have an option to preview, but for application, you do have. Inside that, we have component 1 and component 2. So it should show the content of both. So component 1, component 2. Component 2 for now has no message, but now when I click on component 1 button, you see the message from component 1. Like what we did is we fired the application event and passed this particular message from parent to the application event. And then because this component had declared a handler for application event, it handled that event and retrieved that parameter from application event to itself. And that is how we are displaying this. So this is about the application event. Now the next thing that we are going to see is change handler. Now what is a change handler? Why do we use it? Now, first of all, let me go back and give you a revision of init handler that we had used, right? Even that was a handler. Now, what was init doing was that whenever a component gets loaded, on the load of that component, what action do we perform was something that we were mentioning in the action, right? Similarly, there is something called as change handler. Now, what does this change handler do is, uh, whenever there is a change in an attribute that you have specified within the change handler, then we can perform some action. So in simple words, let's say I have an attribute in this component. The attribute is message. The first ever message that we get is no message because that is the default message. But during the course of this component, let's say if the messages value changes. So we were changing, right? Just now we saw that when we are clicking this button from component 1, we are sending a good evening from component 1 into the message of component 2. So let's say whenever there is an attribute and its value changes, so upon change of the value, I want to perform some action. That is when I use a chain handler. So let us take an example here. So let me say that whenever I am going to take an integer variable called number of messages. Okay. Initially, that number of messages will be 0 because we have no message. But as soon as we get a new message into this message attribute, because that message attribute has changed, I am going to increase the number of messages from 0 to 1. That is what I'm going to do with the help of change handler. So this is how we declare a change handler. We have a aura handler. Name is change. Just like the other one where I showed you the name was init. It was handling the initialization. And here we have change. So we are handling the change. Now we are handling change on which attribute? So the value would be that particular attribute on which the change is getting detected and we are performing some action. So this is that attribute which I'm going to mention over here. And upon the change of that attribute, I'm going to perform this particular action. So first of all, I told you that we are going to have an integer attribute, right? So let me declare that integer attribute here. So I've named it number of messages. Type is integer. Default value is 0. Now when the items change method is called, when the message changes, we are calling this particular method. So let me go here and whenever you create more than one method in controller or helper, you need to separate it by a comma. Let me save it. Items change is the name of the method that we are calling. All I'm doing is in a variable, I'm getting number of messages, which would be initially 0. So I'm just adding +1 to it and storing it in this variable and then transferring this variable into the actual attribute that we have, which is number of messages. Simple, right? Now, let me also display the number of messages over here. Okay. Let me go to the application and review. So right now there is no message in component 2. That's why the number of messages are 0. The moment I click on this button, we change the message in the message attribute of component 2. And that is why the number of messages is added by 1. So that is about chain handler. Now, the next thing that we are going to look at is aura method. Now, I've opened back the components that we had used for showing you the parent to child communication, that is through component event. But like I told you, component event only works like when the event is fired by the child component and it is triggering some action in the parent component, right? But let's say I want to do the inverse. If I want to fire a, if I want to click a button or something on the parent component, and that should perform some action which is defined in the child component, then how am I supposed to do that? I can use application event, but application event is too costly and we should not be using that. So the other alternative is aura method. So what we should be able to do with aura method is upon the click of button or something in the parent component, I'll be able to call some action or some method which is defined in the child component. Now, how can we do that? So first of all, let's create a method or a method in the child component. How do we do that? So this is the syntax. Aura method and closing aura method. Name of that method is child method. Action is like whenever this method is called, I'm going to call this particular method on my controller. So I'm going to save it and I need to create this method in the controller. So let's quickly do that. Next method, comma separated. I just created a method called child action where parents, this is the syntax. You can use anything over here. Event.getParam, and this is what we use arguments. This is the standard syntax that you use to get all the arguments inside the method. Put it in some variable, and all I'm doing is just popping up a alert box showing my both the values. Hey, gorgeous. Okay, that's it that I'm doing in my child component. Now, how do I call this particular child method from my parent component? So how am I supposed to do that is, first of all, from where we are calling our child component, right? We need to give a aura ID. A aura ID makes this component like gives this particular component a unique identifier called child component. Now let me also create a button on the parent component. Parent button to call child method. That's what the label I've given so that we could understand. And we are calling the parent action method. So let me call parent action separated by comma, of course. What I'm doing here is I'm doing component.find child CMP. Now, what is child CMP? It is the aura ID that I've given for this particular component. It's going to find that component, and once I have that in this variable, I'm just going to use that and call the child method. What is this child method? It is the name that I've given over here. So that name I'm going to use here, and I have the message. So I've just saved it, and yeah, let me put back parent component over here. Okay. So right now we have a button, parent button to call child method on the parent, and on the child component, we just have whatever we had previously for the component event exercise. Let me click on this and an alert box should pop up. So you see, hey gorgeous. This is what happened because of the component child. I mean the child component. This method was declared in the child component. Now the next thing that we are going to learn is Lightning is URL addressable interface and what is the use of it. Now let us say we have two different components, and like I showed you in component event, we were calling parent component from the child, right? But right now, or even in application event, I showed you that I had declared two components in a single application, right? I am not doing anything out of those two. But when I click on a button, I actually want to navigate to the other component. Like, don't misunderstand this with Aura method, because in Aura method, we were clicking a button and we were firing a method of the child component. But here I'm not doing that. Here, two components are completely unrelated, and I want to navigate from one component screen to another component. How am I going to do that? For that, we have Lightning is URL addressable interface that we must use. And let me show you what we are doing now to explain you Lightning is URL addressable. So first of all, let me give you an example with the help of a child object that I've created. Child of email. This is the custom object that I've created. And it looks up to contact point email. So contact point email is the parent for this record. It has these fields. It has name, which is auto number, contact point email, which is a lookup field, description, and yeah, those are the main things. Now, what I want to do is, if you remember, we had created a Lightning record form component, right? So we were creating a contact point email. Let me show you that. Okay, let's refresh. Now, when I click on generic button, you see this is the Lightning record form that we had created earlier. Now, what I want to do is the moment I create this record of contact point email, like the moment I save it, and if it gets saved successfully, I want to navigate to other component, which is this one child of email component. And in this component, I have made a Lightning record edit form. This is something that we have covered earlier. If you do not follow this, please rewind my video and just go and watch that first. This record edit form is for creating a child of email object record where we have parent as contact point email, right? So whichever record gets created here, whichever contact point email, its ID should go and sit on this new child of email record that I'm creating, and it should get auto-populated. That is my aim. And then we should be able to save the child of email. So for that, first of all, in this child of email component, I've created a Lightning record edit form. Object name is child of email. On load, I'm calling this method. On success, I'm calling this method. I'm showing three fields on this form. One is description, one is parent field, one is submit. So like I had mentioned earlier, if you create a button of type submit, the save is taken care of automatically. We do not need to write any custom Apex code for that. Now, what my requirement is that when I load this form, I want to auto-populate this field called contact point email, right? With the parent contact point email. So I have given the Aura ID for this field as parent field. And on load, when this particular component will get loaded, this method will get called. So let me declare that method. What am I doing is component.find parent field. Now parent field is the aura ID of this particular field, dot set its value to component.get v.record ID. Now v.record ID, I've created a attribute over here explicitly, and I've not used force has record ID because I'm not going to get the record ID of, I'm going to create a new record, right, of child of email, correct? And because that button is going to be clicked from account, even if I specify force has record ID, it is going to give me the record ID of account and not the record ID of the contact point email that I've created. So that is why it's of no point to do that. But I've just created that attribute. How am I going to populate that attribute is something that I'm showing next. On handle success, we want to show the toast message. So okay. And this is the target component. This is where we are moving from one component to this component. So this is where I'm going to declare my lightning is URL addressable, which makes this component accessible for the other component to call and move from there to here. Other thing is init. Now I have a handler for init. And when this particular, the full component is initialized, I'm calling this method. So let's do one thing. That method we'll write down later. Let's go to record component form. Now here, what am I supposed to do? Only when it is successful, I want to open that component, right? So first of all, when it is successful, I want to get that created records ID. So going to the controller on handle success. Okay, I have everything written. Let me remove it so that you don't get confused. Event.getParam ID. This will get the record that is created, its ID, and will store in this particular variable. Now, next thing that I want to do is I want to give this component the reference of the page where I'm trying to go to. So this is what I'm supposed to create, where page reference. Now, first of all, in order to be able to use the page reference and in order to navigate to the other target component, we need to make sure we have these two attributes declared. This one. The first one is page reference, which is of type object. The other one is this lightning navigation that we need to declare. And its aura ID I'm going to give as nav service. Now, I created a variable for page reference. This is all standard that you could search for. This syntax you will be able to find out on Google. Now, what is the type of the component that I'm going to move to? Like, what is the type of my target component? So it is a lightning aura component, right? So that is why I'm going to say standard underscore underscore component. What is the attribute? Now, in attribute, I need to say the name wherein I want to navigate. So I'm going to say C underscore underscore and exact name, exact case and all that of that particular component I'm going to mention. And the next thing is ID. C underscore underscore ID equals to created record. So this is the parameter that I'm going to pass. And here I've put created record ID because this is the variable where I'm getting the contact point email, which is created, that records record ID, and I'm going to pass it to the ID. Now the next thing, now I've finished creating the page reference. Now the next thing that I need to do is find the nav service. So component.find nav service. So nav service is something that I declared, right? It is of Lightning navigation. So I'm just going to save. And the third step is finally navigate to that page reference that I've given. So this is the variable page reference wherein I've mentioned where I want to navigate and what as a parameter do I want to pass. So that particular page reference I'm going to take, and finally I'm going to navigate to that page. So that's about it. And now coming here, once this component runs this navigate to here and we are here, what will happen is the initializer of this particular component will get called. So that is why, because we are handling that initialization, this method is going to get called. So let's declare or define this particular method. Okay. Here, what am I doing is component.get v.page reference. Now you will wonder that we had not created a attribute of, with name page reference. But whenever you use Lightning is URL addressable, you by default get this attribute and you can directly access it. Just like how you were getting using the force has record ID and you were getting record ID attribute, right? You didn't have to declare it. Similarly, when you when you implement this interface called Lightning is URL addressable, you no longer need to uh, define this attribute in your Lightning component, but make sure P is small, R is capital. So we are going to get that and store it over here. Now, if you remember, in that page reference, we had given a state wherein I was passing a parameter. In that parameter, the name that I've given is C underscore underscore ID. So here I'm going to access it now. So the root was page reference dot state and dot this one. So that is how I'm going to retrieve it. My page reference, which is this page reference dot state dot whatever variable name that I had given over here. So C underscore underscore ID. So I'm going to say C underscore underscore ID over here. And that ID I've got here. So I'm going to say component dot set. And over here, the record ID attribute that I've made, and I told you force has record ID is not used because it doesn't make sense. So in this record ID that I have explicitly created, I'm going to put the ID of the contact point email that got created into this one. And that record ID, you see here, we are putting the parent field dot set v dot value and we are putting the record ID, right? So this is the record ID of contact point email and we are putting that in the parent field, which is nothing but our contact point email. So now let me save all this, edit, and yeah, it's record form component only. Let me refresh it. So let's create a contact point email address. email@child to email.com. Office is primary is true. Now, the moment I click on save, first of all, let me do one thing. Use the lighting quick action without header because this is looking quite ugly. Okay. It's not refreshed. I hope it was saved. Yeah, it is saved. Oh, I changed it over here. Actually, I should have changed on the record form component. Okay, got saved. Okay. So now we don't have the header and the cancel button. Child to email.com. The moment I save, I am navigated to the child to email objects lightning record edit form. And you see the parent is auto-populated with that particular contact point email that we just created. Let me put the description and let me save it. Okay. I'm not closing this tab and all that, but it got saved. So I have not created a tab for this object, but all I could do is I could query and show you. Sorry. Let me not put the ID parameter. That was the ID of the component. So this is the record that we created. So this was about Lightning is URL addressable, and this brings us to the end of our Aura tutorial. I hope this tutorial helped you. And if this did, I have worked very hard to create this entire tutorial. So I would please request you to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much.